Imagine waking up in complete darkness. Your wrists and ankles are chained, your body unable to move. Then, from the shadows, a voice begins to play, calm, cold, rehearsed. It's a man reading a script into a tape recorder. But this isn't a movie. This is your reality. And what he describes isn't fiction. It's exactly what he plans to do to you. This was the nightmare that dozens of women lived through inside a trailer in the deserts of New Mexico. A trailer that its owner, the sadistic David Parker Ray, called his toy box. A place so horrifying, so unimaginable, that even seasoned FBI agents called it hell on earth. Tonight, we step inside that toy box. David Parker Ray looked like an ordinary man. Born in 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, Ray grew up in a broken home with a violent, alcoholic father. His childhood was marked by neglect, and soon, he discovered a twisted fascination, bondage, and sadistic fantasies. By the time he was a teenager, Ray was already collecting violent pornography and sadomasochistic magazines, creating a dark fantasy world that would never leave him. But Ray didn't just keep these fantasies to himself. Over the decades, he became obsessed. He built devices. He studied torture. He practiced control. Outwardly, he worked as a mechanic and even served in the U.S. Army. But behind closed doors, he was constructing something no one could have imagined. A chamber of horrors where he could make his fantasies real. The toy box was a trailer parked near Elephant Butte Lake in New Mexico. From the outside, it looked ordinary. Inside, it was anything but. When investigators finally entered, they found a soundproof torture chamber filled with chains, shackles, medical tools, pulleys, whips, and surgical instruments. There were mirrors mounted to the ceiling so victims could watch their own torment. Drawings of women in bondage covered the walls, alongside detailed diagrams of torture devices that Ray had built himself. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't the tools, it was the tape. Ray had recorded an audio cassette that he played for each new victim. Calmly, he would introduce himself and explain exactly what was about to happen to them. The tape described how they would be drugged, chained, raped, and tortured for as long as he wished. He told them escape was impossible, resistance was useless, and that when he was finished, they would most likely be killed. This was psychological torture layered on top of physical abuse. Victims weren't just suffering. They were forced to hear, in chilling detail, how their suffering would unfold. Ray is believed to have abducted and tortured over 40 women. Many of them were sex workers or women who were less likely to be reported missing. To this day, very few bodies have been recovered, which means we may never know the true scale of his crimes. One known victim was Cynthia Vigil, a 22-year-old woman who managed to do the impossible, escape. In March 1999, Cynthia was lured into Ray's trailer, where she was immediately chained, stripped, and subjected to his horrifying routine. For 3 days, she was raped and tortured. But on the third day, when Ray left for work, Cynthia seized her chance. She managed to grab the keys to her restraints left behind by Ray's girlfriend and accomplice, Cindy Hendy. Naked, wearing only a dog collar, she broke free and ran for her life through the desert until she found help. Her escape blew the case wide open. When police stormed Ray's property, they were unprepared for what they found. The toy box was worse than anything they had imagined. Agents described it as a chamber straight out of hell. But here's the chilling part. Despite the evidence, the audio tapes, the devices, the victim testimonies, Ray himself insisted he never killed anyone. Authorities, however, didn't believe him. They suspected that Ray had murdered many of his victims, disposing of their bodies in Elephant Butte Lake and the surrounding desert. The FBI conducted extensive searches, even bringing in divers and cadaver dogs. But the lake was vast, the desert unforgiving. To this day, no confirmed bodies have been found. Ray was arrested, along with his girlfriend Cindy Hendy and his daughter Glenda, who had allegedly helped lure victims. In court, Cynthia Vigil testified in horrifying detail about her ordeal. She wasn't the only one. Other survivors came forward, though many couldn't remember everything. They had been drugged with powerful sedatives during their captivity. Ray was ultimately convicted of kidnapping and torture. In 2002, he was sentenced to 224 years in prison. But justice was short-lived. Only months later, David Parker Ray suffered a fatal heart attack in his prison cell. He never revealed the full truth about how many women had suffered or died in his toy box. What makes this case so disturbing isn't just the sadistic torture, it's the mystery. How many women were taken to that trailer? How many died? Where are their bodies? To this day, families of missing women in New Mexico and beyond wonder if their loved ones were victims of the toy box killer. And because Ray died before he could confess, the truth may never be known. The desert keeps its secrets well. Beneath the sands and waters of Elephant Butte Lake may lie the answers to one of the darkest mysteries in American crime history. A man who built his own personal hell, who turned torture into ritual, and who left behind a trail of terror that still lingers today. David Parker Ray may be dead, but his toy box, the nightmare he created, still haunts the world. Snow falls softly over the Bavarian countryside. The year is 1922. On a remote farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck, 6 members of a family are about to meet a fate so brutal, so shrouded in mystery, that more than a century later, the case remains one of the darkest unsolved crimes in history. The footprints in the snow told a story no one could explain. Steps leading into the house, but none leading out. For days, neighbors noticed strange smoke rising from the chimney, meals being cooked, and the farm animals being fed. Yet inside the farmhouse, the Gruber family lay butchered, hacked to death with a mattock, their bodies stacked in the barn like discarded wood. This was no ordinary murder. This was something colder, something patient, something that still haunts Germany to this day. The farmstead of Hinterkaifeck was isolated, tucked away in the woods, about an hour from Munich. The family who lived there was as ordinary as any rural Bavarian household, but with whispers of scandal. Andreas Gruber, the 63-year-old patriarch, was known as a harsh, difficult man with a reputation for cruelty. His wife, Kazilia, 72, was quiet but submissive, enduring his domineering presence. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, a 35-year-old widow, had returned to live with them after her husband's death in World War I. She was raising 2 children, Kazilia Jr., just 7 years old, Joseph, a 2-year-old toddler, whose parentage sparked rumors that would later cast suspicion on the family itself. It was no secret that Andreas and Victoria had an incestuous relationship. Court records revealed that they had both been convicted of incest years earlier. Some villagers whispered that little Joseph was not the son of Victoria's late husband, but rather her father's child. Andreas Gruber confided to neighbors that he had seen strange footprints in the snow, leading from the woods straight to the farmhouse. But there were no prints leading back. At night, the family heard footsteps in the attic. They searched, but found nothing. A set of house keys disappeared. A newspaper they had never purchased appeared inside their home. Neighbors urged Andreas to go to the police, but he dismissed the incidents, saying he could handle it. 6 days later, the entire family was dead. On March 31st, 1922, an unknown killer, or killers, entered Hinterkaifeck. One by one, the family members were lured into the barn. First Andreas, then his wife Kazilia, then Victoria, and finally young Kazilia Jr. Each was killed with blows to the head using a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe. Their bodies were stacked neatly, covered with straw, as if the killer wanted to hide them. Inside the house, 2-year-old Joseph was found murdered in his crib, his small body covered with one of his mother's skirts. Even the maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had started working at the farm only hours before the murders, was killed in her bed. In total, 6 people slaughtered. But the most haunting detail? 7-year-old Kazilia had survived the initial blows. Evidence showed she had pulled out her own hair in agony before dying beside her mother. For days, the farmstead carried on as if nothing had happened. Smoke rose from the chimney. The cattle were fed. The family dog was heard barking. Meals were prepared in the kitchen. Neighbors assumed the Grubers were busy with farm work. It wasn't until April 4th, nearly a week later, that they investigated. What they found inside the barn shocked them to their core. Police swarmed the farm, but in 1922, forensic science was primitive. The scene was chaotic, contaminated by curious neighbors. Clues were lost, and the killer slipped away. Yet some details stood out. The killer had stayed at the farm for days after the murders, eating food, milking cows, feeding animals. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever committed the crime either had a key or was already inside. The weapon, a mattock, was later found hidden in the attic. Victoria Gabriel had an affair with neighbor Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who believed he might have been the father of little Joseph. When he discovered the child might actually have been Andreas's, he grew bitter. When Lorenz helped neighbors discover the bodies, his behavior was strange, calm, almost indifferent. Some said he moved the corpses without hesitation, as though he already knew what he would find. Others claimed he made suspicious remarks about Victoria. Was Lorenz a grieving lover? Or a man driven to rage by betrayal? Andreas was deeply disliked in the village. His abusive behavior and the incest scandal gave many locals motive to wish him dead. Could someone from the community have finally snapped, taking vengeance on the entire household? Some believe the murders were the work of vagrants or soldiers passing through post-war Germany. But if it were random killers, why stay on the farm for days, feeding animals and eating meals? Why cover the bodies with straw? The most chilling theory, that the killer was already inside the house. Those footsteps in the attic, the missing keys, the newspaper. What if the Grubers had been living with their killer all along, unaware of the danger above them? Despite questioning dozens of suspects, the police never made an arrest. Forensic techniques were too primitive. Clues were lost in the chaos, and every theory led to dead ends. In 1923, the farmhouse itself was demolished. But when the bodies were exhumed for autopsy, another chilling detail emerged. The heads had been removed and sent to Munich for further examination. Those skulls later disappeared during World War II and have never been recovered. 6 victims. No weapon. No heads. No answers. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain Germany's most famous unsolved crime. Books, documentaries, and countless theories continue to circulate. Every few years, new researchers dig through old files, hoping to find the truth. But perhaps the true horror is not knowing. Whoever committed the murders was methodical, patient, someone who not only killed but lived among the dead, feeding animals, stoking fires, and sleeping in the home of the family he had just slaughtered. To this day, when the wind howls over the Bavarian countryside, some say the spirits of Hinterkaifeck still linger, waiting for justice that may never come. Snow covered the ground again that spring. The farmhouse was torn down, the land plowed over. Yet the mystery of Hinterkaifeck remains buried in the soil. 6 lives, erased in one night. A killer who vanished without a trace. And footprints in the snow that only went one way, into the farm, but never back out. Imagine being 17 years old. You've just finished school, your future full of possibilities. But then, one night, you're snatched off the street by people you thought you could trust. From that moment, your life is no longer yours. For the next 44 days, every waking second is turned into a nightmare so horrific, so inhuman, that it still chills Japan to this day. This is the story of Junko Furuta, a teenage girl whose murder is often described as one of the most brutal crimes in modern history. A story of cruelty, silence, and the darkness that can live inside ordinary people. Junko Furuta was born in Misato, Japan, in 1971. By all accounts, she was a typical high school girl, bright, cheerful, hardworking. Her classmates described her as someone who avoided trouble, someone who wasn't into smoking, drinking, or partying. She had plans for the future, ambitions beyond her small town. At just 17, she was already admired for her dedication to studies and her quiet kindness. But none of that mattered on November 25, 1988, the day she crossed paths with evil. On that evening, Junko was riding her bicycle home from work. What she didn't know was that 4 teenage boys were lurking in the area. These boys weren't strangers. They attended nearby schools. But behind their normal teenage faces lay a chilling secret. They were affiliated with the Yakuza, Japan's organized crime syndicate. Among them was Hiroshi Miyano, 18 years old, the ringleader. Miyano had a reputation for violence. He bragged about his gang ties, intimidated classmates, and took pleasure in cruelty. That night, he and his friends decided they wanted Junko. They staged an ambush. One of the boys kicked her bicycle, forcing her to the ground. Pretending to be a concerned bystander, Miyano offered to walk her home. Trusting him, Junko agreed. But instead of leading her to safety, he led her into a trap. From that moment on, Junko Furuta disappeared from the outside world. The boys took Junko to a house in Adachi, Tokyo, the home of one of the boys' parents. And it was there, hidden in plain sight, that her nightmare began. For 44 days, Junko was held captive. The boys told her parents she had run away and was safe, making sure no one came looking. At first, they intended to keep her just for a while. But soon, their cruelty spiraled out of control. Junko was subjected to beatings, starvation, and repeated assaults, sometimes dozens of times a day. The boys invited friends and even other gang members to participate. It is estimated that over 100 different people assaulted her during her captivity. But the horror didn't stop at physical abuse. The boys made sure she suffered in ways designed to break her spirit. The details of Junko's torture are almost too brutal to imagine. But to understand the cruelty, they must be told. She was hung from the ceiling and beaten repeatedly. They forced her to eat cockroaches and drink her own urine. They burned her skin with cigarettes and lighters. At one point, they inserted foreign objects into her body, including bottles, scissors, and even a lit firework. Her face was swollen beyond recognition. Her hands were so damaged from burns that she could no longer hold objects. As the days turned into weeks, Junko begged for death. Yet even in her suffering, she showed moments of incredible resilience. When forced to play games with her captors, she sometimes won. And when she did, she requested small things, like water or a radio to listen to music. These glimpses of humanity in the midst of horror make her story all the more heartbreaking. What makes this case even more disturbing is how many people knew and did nothing. The house where Junko was held was not abandoned. Parents lived there. Neighbors heard strange noises. Yet no one intervened. At one point, Junko even managed to dial the police from a phone inside the house. But when officers called back, one of the boys answered and claimed it was a mistake. The police didn't follow up. This failure to act sealed her fate. By January 1989, Junko's body was failing. Her injuries were too severe, her spirit too broken. On January 4th, after losing a game of mahjong against her captors, the boys decided she needed to be punished. They beat her with an iron barbell, set her legs on fire, and dropped heavy objects onto her stomach. She could no longer move. She could no longer eat. That night, Junko Furuta died. She was just 17 years old. The boys placed her body in a drum, filled it with concrete, and abandoned it in a construction site in Koto, Tokyo. Her nightmare was over, but the story was far from finished. Weeks later, police investigating unrelated gang activity stumbled upon the drum. Inside, they found Junko's remains. The four main perpetrators, Hiroshi Miyano, Joe Ogura, Shinji Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe, were arrested. Their trials shocked Japan. But what came next only added to the outrage. Because the perpetrators were juveniles, Japanese law treated them with shocking leniency. Hiroshi Miyano, the ringleader, received just 20 years in prison. The others received even lighter sentences, ranging from 5 to 9 years. By the mid-2000s, all of them were free men, living under new identities. The public was outraged. Newspapers called it the concrete-encased high school girl murder case. Citizens demanded harsher punishments. But for Junko, justice never came. Junko Furuta's case remains one of the most infamous in Japanese history. It highlighted not only the unimaginable cruelty of her captors, but also the failures of a society that allowed her suffering to continue. The police ignored a chance to save her. Neighbors and parents turned a blind eye. The legal system failed to deliver justice. For many, the true horror is not just what happened to Junko, but how easily it was allowed to happen. Despite the darkness of her final days, Junko Furuta is remembered not as a victim, but as a person, a girl who deserved a future, who fought to survive until her very last breath. Her story is told in classrooms, documentaries, and even in films. For Japan, she has become a haunting reminder of what happens when cruelty goes unchecked, when silence replaces action, and when justice is denied. 44 Days of Hell. A girl stolen from her future. A crime so brutal it still echoes across time. Junko Furuta's story is one of pain, but also of remembrance. Because to forget her is to allow her killers to win. And in the shadows of Tokyo, her memory still whispers, "Never let this happen again."